Alan Jones believes that psychotropic drugs are part of a corrupt marketing scheme that exploits the pain and difficulties of human existence. Alan Jones was an investigator for the Pennsylvania Office of the Inspector General. His findings showed that drug companies had paid honorariums to key state officials who held significant influence over the prescriptions issued for state institutions like prisons and mental hospitals.
In Pennsylvania, I was an investigator for the Inspector General's office charged with eradicating waste, fraud, and abuse. I found an account into which pharmaceutical industries were paying monies to take state employees on trips, to fly them to conferences, to influence them to accept a medication protocol developed in the state of Texas. I was told to back off of the investigation when it became apparent that pharmaceutical industry personnel had done things that they were not supposed to have done. I was told point blank by my supervisors that the drug companies write checks to politicians on both sides of the aisle. Back off, these guys are contributors. The director of the Pennsylvania State Mental Health Services Agency was Gerald Radke, who came to that position directly from his former position as marketing director for Eli Lilly Corporation. I think there's little wonder why I was not permitted to pursue my inquiry. I refused to back off. The science that was available to a layman, even such as myself, clearly indicated that these drugs were dangerous, hideously overpriced, and little more, if any, effective at that time than the generic drugs. I continued my investigation. When I could get to nowhere through government channels, I went to the press. In February of 2004, the New York Times and the British Medical Journal reported on my findings. Many other newspapers followed suit. 2 months later, I was suspended from my job and then fired for having spoken to the press.
Alan Jones is a government whistleblower. He has been fired for going to the press when evidence of corruption, fraud, and graft was covered up, ignored, and set aside by the Pennsylvania Office of Inspector General.
I feel appalled. I feel shocked. I feel threatened. I feel betrayed. I feel disappointed. Every single entity that was supposed to protect the most helpless people in our society has failed. Some have failed through ignorance, some have failed because they've been misled, some have failed because they just don't care. But somehow it is worse to create the facade of protection through an FDA and through an interested government when there is no real protection, only the facade.
According to Harvard-trained psychiatrist Dr. Stefan Krzyzewski, it is my opinion that psychiatry has a credibility gap, and that credibility gap is widening as the disclosure of public psychopharmacological embarrassments continue to destroy its image. Writing a letter to the incoming president of the American Psychiatric Association, he also says, quote, "Psychiatry must address its internal issues before it seeks to blame others for its failures. The golden age of psychiatry will only be a glimpse of what it has been, since the seeds of psychiatry's future failures will have been nurtured by psychiatry's current inability to address the prostitution of its core values and worth."
Part of my responsibilities as a consultant psychiatrist at the Department of Public Welfare was to oversee and review the quality of care being given to children, for example, in residential treatment facilities and in inpatient psychiatric facilities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In the course of those duties, I reported on the deaths of certain individuals, both children and adults, and was fired in part as a result of that. We had children whose care I reviewed in Pennsylvania and who were sent out of state, who were over-medicated, who were secluded, who were restrained, who were sexually abused, emotionally abused, mentally abused, and some of them who paid the ultimate price by dying in facilities who were responsible for their care. That care was underwritten by Pennsylvania Medicaid, and I think is a tremendous embarrassment, has to be a tremendous embarrassment to the people who run the Pennsylvania Medicaid program. I still, I don't cry about it anymore, I suppose, because I've gotten too angry about it and I'm trying to do something about it, but it remains a terrible statement on behalf of a government body, in this case the Department of Public Welfare, whose mission is to protect the welfare of citizens of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and who in fact is doing just the opposite.
I just saw an ad the other day that said, well, not enough people are taking statin drugs for heart conditions. But there was no mention of why not change your lifestyle to prevent the condition in the first place. No mention. Or what role nutrients might play in helping lessen elevated cholesterol or elevated blood pressure, because the science shows that you can do that. But it's not being promoted because it's not patentable. It's not profitable. You don't get, what do you get in this? 35 to 40% markup? Take a look at the markup on drugs. Look at Lipitor. 20 milligrams, $272 what you pay. Their cost $580, 4,500% markup. Then look at the real big one, Prozac. Prozac, 20 milligrams, cost you $247, cost them 11 cents. 224,000% markup. But they're not the worst of them. The worst of them is Xanax. 1 milligram, 1 little milligram. You pay $136, it costs them 2 cents. They make a 569,000% markup.
There are different studies on how many uninsured poor people there are. The numbers range between 49 million and 67 million. It's a big group. And what makes this even worse is that they are, quite frankly, the only ones paying these very high drug prices, twice as high as in Europe and Canada. The rest of us who are fortunate enough to have insurance, we have a pharmacy benefit manager negotiating drug prices. And you know what? Those negotiated prices are the same as in Europe, the same as in Canada. The only ones that pay these very high inflated prices are the poor, the uninsured. So the fight for what the drug companies call a free market is really a fight to charge our poorest the highest price. And that is immoral.
Once you have a medicine, in psychiatry in this case, joining with pharmaceutical companies and people becoming customers more than they are patients or clients, there's an incentive for everybody involved who is making money off of them, drug companies and doctors, to keep your customer, not to treat them so they'll no longer be coming anymore. And so once you have that kind of incentive, all kinds of problematic things happen.